Welcome back to another episode of 5 a.m. Theology. Chris, if I had to categorize the year of 2020, I would call it the year evil went berserk. We started out with a pandemic that was intentionally unleashed on the United States and the world to further the globalist agenda and control the population. Our own American government forced American citizens to lock themselves up in their own homes. They closed churches, they ripped the kids out of school, and they vehemently turned against millions of its own citizens because they refused to fall in line and take the COVID vaccine. And this was just the beginning. As 2020 and the subsequent 4 years went on, things only got worse. There were liberal funded riots in cities that resulted in injuries, deaths, cities being burned to the ground, businesses being destroyed. The 2020 election was stolen from the Republican Party, and we watched while the Justice Department wrongfully imprisoned Christians and Trump supporters. We realized that those who professed to be on the side of the American people actually hated the American people. But something else happened during those years. Things got so bad that people had had enough of the evil. Conservatives and Christians stopped quietly sitting by and they started to make their voices heard. They fought back against the evil. They found a new purpose: fight down the lies and the evil and speak truth into a government and culture that had completely gone off the rails.
And then the 2024 election happened last November. And President Trump won big. He won the popular vote, won all 7 swing states. Republicans won the House of Representatives and Senate, and flipped a lot of previously Democrat counties in the country to Republican. And Christians who had been encouraged and exhorted by their pastors and peers to get out and vote were a big part of the victory. After the election, so many people were praising and thanking God for his grace and his mercy towards us in the United States, and we were also doing that. But now, 3 months into President Trump's administration, and with all of his conservative and even some solid Christian picks for his cabinet having gotten through, people are starting to complain and grumble against, wondering why there's still evil going on from corrupt congresspeople, corrupt judges, corrupt mainstream media, and other radical leftists. They believe that we fought and prayed hard for that election victory for 4 years, and God answered our prayers. So shouldn't things just be good now?
And all of this was exactly what was going through my head this week when we got to 2 of David's writings in 2 Samuel and Psalm 60 this week. For the most part, we're in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, but with the chronological Bible, the Psalms are included during the time they were written. And Psalm 60 is a psalm by David, written, as the intro says, when David fought Aram Naharaim and Aram Zobah, and when Joab returned and struck down 12,000 Edomites. This psalm, along with 2 Samuel chapter 7, are smack dab in the middle of a lot of fighting by David and his army. By this time, David had been fighting battles against the enemy of God for a long time. It all began when he was only 17 and Samuel anointed him to be the next king of Israel. You would think after this that David would be sitting back, basking in God's grace and waiting to become king. But that's not even close to how things play out.
David believed the promise that he would be king. He knew God was the Almighty and was sovereign, and he trusted that God's promise would come to pass. But he doesn't sit around waiting for God to do his thing. What does he do after he's anointed? He goes back to tending sheep. He humbly goes back and faithfully serves King Saul. He takes on an over 9-foot giant because he was blaspheming God. And as we looked at last week, when David has his chance to kill Saul twice and open the pathway for him to, quote unquote, help God's plan come to fruition, he doesn't, because he recognized that taking Saul's life would be sinful. And this was just the beginning. After Saul dies, you would think that David would be crowned king of all Israel, as God said, but he isn't. He's crowned king of Judah, his own tribe, and then spends the next 7 years fighting with the other tribes who had made Saul's son Ishbosheth king.
Even after David does become king over all of Israel, and God makes a covenant with them that there will always be a descendant of Judah on the throne, a descendant of David, pointing to Jesus, David still has to fight enemies. Most of the time when he battled, he would inquire of God about it, and God would assure him, go ahead and fight. But even then, David's army would suffer losses. They wouldn't lose the battle, but they would suffer losses. And David would have to fight another day. David's entire life, from the time God showed him unbelievable grace that he would be anointed king over all of Israel, was pretty much one battle after another. He had huge victories, but he also had setbacks. But he never stopped fighting. He never stopped trusting God. And he never stopped marching onward.
And it's in the middle of a lot of fighting, after some victories and setbacks, that David composes two writings to God. The first one is in 2 Samuel 7, it's verses 18 to 29, and I'll just read verses 20 to 23. And what more can David say to you? For you know your servant, O Lord God, because of your promise and according to your own heart, you have brought about all this greatness to make your servant know it. Therefore, you are great, O Lord God, for there is none like you, and there is no God beside you, according to all that we have heard with our ears. And who is like your people Israel, the one nation on earth who God went to redeem to be his people, making himself a name and doing for them great and awesome things by driving out before your people, whom you redeemed for yourself from Egypt, a nation and its gods. So here's David recognizing victories that God has given his people and thanking him for his grace and mercy.
But then, shortly after this, comes Psalm 60, and I'll just read verses 1 to 3. O God, you have rejected us, broken our defenses. You have been angry. Oh, restore us. You have made the land to quake. You have torn it open. Repair its breaches, for it totters. You have made your people see hard things. You have given us wine to drink that made us stagger. And the psalm goes on. It's not a very long psalm, but it goes on this way. So now here's David lamenting to God about setbacks, losses, and things not going well. And it might seem strange that David can go from one extreme to the other in not a huge span of time, but the time in between these two writings, David was fighting. He was fighting Israel's enemies, God's enemies. And here's why it made me think of what's going on in at least the United States for right now. Many people saw November 4th, 2024 as God giving his people a great victory over evil. And it was, without a doubt. But what they failed to see is that that wasn't even close to the end of the fight. Like David, we're going to be fighting against the enemies of God until we die or until Jesus comes back.
And this shouldn't surprise us, since Paul warned us of it in Ephesians 6, 10 to 13. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Over the last 4 years, our battle hasn't been against liberal Democrats. It's been against evil, Satan, and this has been true since creation. Our battle has never been against other people. It's always been against the demonic forces. And don't think for a minute that since Satan suffered a loss in November, that he's going to give up trying to destroy us.
Yeah, because Chris, if that were true, he would have given up after Jesus' resurrection when he knew his defeat was sure. But he didn't. Instead, he doubles down and gets more aggressive against God's people. Guess he figures I'm taking down as many as I can in the time I have.
Yep.
And until Jesus brings Satan and his minions to complete defeat when he comes back, they're going to keep fighting against all that is good, all that's godly. And as they've always done, they're going to use many of the unregenerate to do it. For our part, like Paul said, we have to put on the armor of God and keep fighting against the evil. We don't get to retire from God's army just because we had a victory, even if it was a huge victory. We have to continue marching onward because that's exactly what evil's going to do.
And when we get to those times when it seems like we can't defeat evil no matter what we do, and we feel discouraged and we're wondering why God takes us on a roller coaster of victories and losses, and even in our own personal lives, we can look to David's words for comfort, a man who knew firsthand the roller coaster life of fighting, winning, and facing setbacks. David finishes up Psalm 60 with these words: O God, grant us help against the foe, for vain is the salvation of man. With God we shall do valiantly. It is he who will tread down our foes. Again, our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against Democrats. It's a spiritual battle against the rulers, authorities, the cosmic powers, and the dark spiritual forces of evil at work in the earth, like they've always been. I think you
Yep.
said it, Rose. Like David said, it's ultimately God's battle to win. He's the only one who's able to win it. Jesus is the only one who did win it. And someday he'll bring it to completion. But in the meantime, we need to stay in the fight and stand firm.
Yep. When David wrote Psalm 60, he saw no evidence that God was bringing victory over the enemies of Israel at that time. But David knew two things. David had always known two things all his life: that victory was only possible with God, and that God works all things for the good of his people and for his glory. So even in the face of what seems to be a defeat, David could speak with confidence that God would lead his people to victory. But in the meantime, like David, like you said, Chris, we have to stay in the fight. Who knows how God is going to use any of us to bring about another victory for his people or to bring about his glory?
Spurgeon once said, "You must be conquerors through him who has loved you if you will be a conqueror at all." So, in the name of and to the glory of Jesus, onward, Christian soldier.
Have a blessed morning, everybody.